Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Charles Payne, and this is Making Money. Guess what we're going to do today? We're going to take a stroll down memory lane, tariff memory lane. As the great Robert Frost would say, it genuinely is the road less traveled. You hear a lot about it, but you don't hear the facts about it. And let's just talk about most people, in fact, when it comes to history, this is the first historian, think about this. Most people, in fact, will not take the trouble in finding out the truth, but are much more inclined to accept the first story that they hear. Thucydides said this. And this is what we're hearing over and over again, the wrong story. So I'm going to talk specifically about, we had McKinley, right? In the McKinley era, that was absolutely phenomenal. But I'm going to specifically talk about 1920. In 1921, the public was clamoring. They were begging, demanding for higher tariffs, right? Why? We had these new industries, the automobile and things like that. They wanted to protect that. The economy was coming on. Our way of life was changing. We had the Emergency Tariff Act of 1921. That was followed by the Fort-Macomber Act of 1922. And there were two specific principles, right? The scientific principle, this linked wages to the exporting country, right? In effect, let's say China has cheaper labor than us. This made sure that this negated the fact that a country would have cheap labor. Then there was the American selling price. I love this one. If a product got here from a foreign country and it was cheaper than Americans, well, guess what? They made it more expensive. And by the way, the Fort-Macomber Act, those tariffs were the highest in history. They averaged 40%. Some, though, went as high as 400%. So what was the result? Let's talk about that for a moment, right? So a result of this act, one result was an increase in spending by top tiers of American people, right? Americans had money. They weren't in a foxhole. The American people, they were taxed less. Remember, all of what President Trump is doing also involves lower taxes. They were taxed less, so they had more money to spend on American goods. What is meant by protectionism? It's an economic policy of the 1920s, essential, and it was essential to trim the way to trim federal expenses. What are we trying to do now? We're trying to shrink the government. We're trying to bring it down. It's too big. It's too bureaucratic. If the deficit is too high, we're spending $1 trillion a year just to service that beast. And the way to do it was through these tariffs. And so these tariffs are absolutely phenomenal. In fact, they sparked something that we now commonly call the Roaring '20s, right? Look at this. Okay, so tariffs are bad. How could they be bad? We were going down here. This is the stock market. It was going down. We had the Emergency Tariff Act, then we had the Fort-Macomber Tariff Act, and then, bam, 500% climb in the stock market. Absolutely phenomenal. In fact, tariffs are working so well, Herbert Hoover, who was running for president, decided to make it a central part of his theme, but he specifically wanted to help American farmers. Now, here's the problem. The plan was hijacked, okay? The tariff schedule was flooded from the industrial sector. So, yeah, we were going to help the American farmer, and then everyone jumped on board. Still, they went into effect. We all know it now as the Smoot-Hawley Act. Went into effect March 13th, 1930. So what happened, right? I mean, every time someone comes on TV, they say, remember Smoot-Hawley? Inflation's going to go through the roof. You think prices skyrocketed back then? Absolutely not. In fact, it was the most extraordinary deflationary spiral in American history. This is it. This is Smoot-Hawley, folks. The 1930s deflation. It wasn't inflation. Prices went down. They didn't go up. So it's really, every time someone comes on and says prices are going to go up, look at Smoot-Hawley. I looked at it. So let's fast forward. President Trump's first term in office, he implemented these tariffs, right? So you go back 2018, here you have the yellow line. That's inflation for us, personal consumption. Inflation goes down, the blue line, tariffs go up. The only time inflation went up was COVID. That was the response to COVID, folks. This had zero to do with tariffs. Now, I know Wall Street and the financial media, they're slavishly just committed to short-term corporate profits, right? Here's the problem. We cannot win the future, right? If everything we measure is measured in quarterly times, right? Not every 90 days. That's the corporate sector. The bottom line, it's time for a longer game, for longer prosperity for all Americans. That's the true story about tariffs. That's the story you need to learn, is ignore what you hear on financial media or anyone else. Now, of course, there were three things that we've always had with these big periods of prosperity: tariff, tough immigration policies, and emerging technology. It has to come from American technology dominance. And of course, we know this week it took a real serious blow with the unveiling of DeepSeek. So I want to show you, last Friday, the Mag 7 stocks were trading really nice and high and big. And of course, they got hammered on Monday. And I had a chart for it, but it vanished. So we fast forward to today, and Michael Hartnett at Bank of America just published a note, and it read that in part, U.S. exceptionalism has peaked. He talks about tailwinds and spending. He talks about immigration in a negative way. Again, this is Wall Street saying, hey, you know what? The bubble is fading. Investors all in on American exceptionalism. Now they're missing all kinds of great opportunities elsewhere. You should be investing in Japan. You should be investing in Europe because the American exceptionalism is out. Our dominance in technology is over. Well, I don't agree.